All right, so today we're diving into the life of one of ancient Rome's most fascinating and, honestly, controversial figures, Marcus Tullius Cicero. Now, this guy was a lot of things: a statesman, a lawyer, a philosopher, but really, he was an orator. His weapon of choice? Words. And believe me, his words could and absolutely did shape the fate of an entire republic.
But you know what? We're actually going to start this story at the very end. Picture this. It's 43 BC. A 63-year-old man is trapped in his carriage, his litter, near the Italian coast. He's not some general, he's not a king, but a squad of soldiers, sent by one of the most powerful men in Rome, has hunted him down. And what does he do? He just calmly leans his head out, accepts what's coming, and is brutally killed on the spot.
And this was not just some quiet assassination. No way. The victim's head and, get this, his hands were hacked off and nailed up for everyone to see, right on the rostra, the public speaking platform in the forum where he'd become famous. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why this incredibly gruesome public spectacle for a guy whose only real weapons were his words?
Well, to figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning, back to his totally improbable rise to power. Because the thing is, Cicero was never supposed to rule Rome. He was a total and complete outsider.
Yeah, he was what the Romans called a novus homo, which basically means a new man. He didn't come from one of those old aristocratic families that had been running the show in Rome for centuries. He had no famous last name, no built-in network of powerful friends. He literally had to build his entire career from the ground up.
So, how on earth did he pull it off? Well, it wasn't with armies and swords, that's for sure. It was with his brain. From a super young age, he just threw himself into his studies: law, philosophy, and most importantly, rhetoric, the art of public speaking. He even traveled all the way to Greece, which was like the Ivy League of the ancient world, to learn from the absolute best. He was forging his mind and his voice into the sharpest weapons in all of Rome. And it worked. He started climbing the cursus honorum, that's the sequence of political offices in Rome, and he did it with just breathtaking speed. I mean, he won every single office at the youngest possible age the law allowed. For a new man with zero family connections, that was, well, it was basically unheard of. The guy's talent was just off the charts.
So in 63 BC, at just 42 years old, he hits the very top. He becomes consul, the highest office in the entire republic. And it's during this 1 year in charge that Rome is about to face one of its darkest hours, a crisis that would end up defining Cicero for the rest of his life.
The danger came from a guy named Catiline. Think of him as this bitter, bankrupt aristocrat who was just fed up. So he gets together this whole crew of other broke, angry people and plots to take over Rome. And we're not talking about a political maneuver here. This was a plan to literally burn the city to the ground and slaughter the senators.
Okay, and this is the moment that goes down in history. Cicero finds out about the plot, and he goes to the Senate to expose it. And who shows up to the meeting? Catiline himself. Can you believe the nerve? But Cicero doesn't call the guards. Oh no, he just stands up and unleashes his voice, delivering one of the most blistering, famous speeches ever.
He starts with that famous line, "O tempora, o mores," which basically means, "Oh, what times, oh, what customs." He was pretty much shouting, "What has happened to us? How can a traitor just sit here among us in the Senate?" And the power of those words, it was just overwhelming.
And from there, Cicero just systematically tore the whole conspiracy apart. First, he gives 4 incredible speeches that totally turn the public against these guys. His words literally drive Catiline out of the city. Then, he gets his hands on some letters that prove everything. But then, he makes a move that would haunt him forever. He convinces the Senate to execute 5 of the top plotters without a proper trial. For saving Rome, they called him Pater Patriae, the father of the fatherland. But that one decision, yeah, that was going to come back to bite him. You see, even though Cicero had saved the day, he couldn't stop the bigger picture. The entire republic was starting to crack at the seams. The old way of doing things, with laws and debates, that was on its way out. The new era, it was all about powerful generals and their private armies. And that, right there, was the central conflict of his entire life. On one side, you have Cicero, fighting for the old ideals of the republic. You know, the rule of law, the power of the Senate, the concept of liberty. But on the other side, you've got this new reality. And that reality was the raw power of the first triumvirate, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. These guys weren't playing by the old rules. They had personal armies, they made backroom deals, and they cared way more about their own ambition than any tradition.
Now,
These guys actually invited Cicero to join their little club, but he said no. He saw their alliance for what it was, the end of the republic he loved. So his enemies pounced. They used that one big vulnerability against him. Remember those executions without a trial? They passed a law aimed squarely at him, and just like that, Cicero, the father of the fatherland, was forced into exile. They even tore down his house and, in a really twisted move, built a temple to liberty right on top of it.
And this wasn't just politics. It absolutely broke him as a person. When you read his letters from that time, you can just feel the crushing depression. I mean, he thought about suicide. He'd lost everything: his home, his reputation, his entire life's work. All gone.
He did eventually get to come back to Rome, but the republic he knew was basically dead, with Julius Caesar running everything. But then, Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC, and Cicero, now an old man, sees a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this is one last desperate chance to save the republic. So he decides he's going all in for one final fight.
And his new #1 enemy? Mark Antony. Cicero looked at Antony, who was Caesar's right-hand man, and he was absolutely convinced this guy was just going to become the next tyrant. He saw the same dangerous ambition, the same disrespect for the law that had already brought Rome to its knees.
So what does he do? He unleashes his ultimate weapon one last time, his voice. He delivers this series of 14 speeches called the Philippics, and they were just brutal. Brilliant, yes, but also incredibly savage and personal. He attacked every single thing about Mark Antony, from his politics to his character. It was an all-out war, fought entirely with words.
But here's the thing. This time, words weren't going to be enough. Antony didn't fire back with a speech of his own. He made a political deal. He teamed up with Caesar's heir, a young guy named Octavian, and they made a prescription list, which is just a fancy term for a hit list. And you can bet Mark Antony made damn sure that Cicero's name was right at the top. And that brings us right back to where we started, with Cicero's execution on the side of a road.
So, in the short term, Mark Antony won. He got what he wanted. He silenced the voice that drove him crazy. But in the grand scheme of things, Cicero's death wasn't the end of his story at all. In a weird way, it's actually where his real, lasting victory begins.
Think about it. Today, Antony is mostly remembered for losing a war, but Cicero's ideas, they basically became immortal. Centuries later, his writings were rediscovered and helped kickstart the entire Renaissance. His ideas on things like natural law and liberty, they lit a fire under Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke. They directly inspired the founding fathers of the United States. I mean, Thomas Jefferson pointed right at Cicero as a major influence on the Declaration of Independence.
And if you want a really cool, physical piece of proof of his influence, look at this. This is the personal copy of one of Cicero's books that belonged to a young Prince Henry who would grow up to be King Henry VIII of England. For literally centuries, if you were considered an educated person in the Western world, you read Cicero. It was part of the curriculum.
And it goes even beyond his political ideas. He fundamentally changed the way we communicate in the West. He took Latin, which was a pretty practical, no-nonsense language for soldiers and bureaucrats, and he turned it into this beautiful, complex tool for philosophy and incredible speeches. For almost 2,000 years, the very style of what we'd call eloquent writing was basically his invention.
So, all this brings us back to a final, really big question. The man, Cicero, he lost. He died watching everything he ever fought for crumble into a dictatorship. But here we are, 2,000 years later. His enemies are nothing but dust, and his words, they're still being quoted in the halls of governments he couldn't have even dreamed of. So yeah, he lost his battle for the Roman Republic, but you have to wonder, didn't his ideas ultimately win the war?